I did not calm down until Carl Lewis came and talked to us. And he was like wandering around. Somehow he got in and linked up with Matt Imes. He was behind there, like looking at the boats. And he literally, all he said was, he just looked around and goes, "Oh, gonna go race the final." So he's like, "Oh, ain't nothing to it but to do it."
I'm Alex Del Soro. And we have just Eddie. It's Kevin Sauer. Needed to France. Eric Marie. It's Mahe Drysdale. It is Sir Matthew Pinson. Thank you for being here. I'm Alex Del Soro, Grower's Choice, and this is yet another podcast, but this is a different one. This is, I woke up this morning and I was fanboying this. I was so nervous. This is the first time in all of these interviews that I've done, hundreds of interviews, that I'm actually nervous because I'm talking to someone who I watched on a little screen, because most of you kids nowadays have these big screen TVs. I watched this guy win gold medal live in person with some of my best friends in a room. This is the head coach of UPenn, Bryan Volpenhein. Bryan, holy cow. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I need to be nervous. I'm just
I'm just going to be right up front.
Dude.
So listen, every interview starts the same.
Yeah.
And it's, where were you? How old were you when you took that first rowing stroke?
I was just turned 18, and I was, it was my fall of my freshman year at Ohio State. So fall of 94.
So what got you to get into that boat in 1994 at Ohio State? Because it's a club team. It's not really a big program.
Yeah. No, I saw I was doing a tour of campus with my mom that summer, and I saw a flyer advertising the team, the club team. And I thought the picture looked cool, and I had never really heard of rowing before. And I was like, oh, that might be something to try. And I grabbed the flyer and then didn't think much of it the rest of the summer. And then when I got back to campus in the fall, I saw another one and it reminded me. And then I literally was sort of sitting around my dorm room, and that one of my roommates at the time, he was also interested. So we almost missed the first meeting actually, but so we were just like, oh, that's tonight. And then we ran down and across the street to the boathouse. And
where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in just north of Cincinnati. If anybody knows the Kings Island amusement park, I right behind it.
Now, Cincinnati had a pretty good junior program. I mean, it's some of the most famous junior rowing back early 2000s was Cincinnati. Were they a program back then? I mean, were they something
and they were,
you saw?
No, I never saw them, but they were good back then. I think Jesdale was there, and he had a long run of good crews, and I had no idea. I played baseball and grew up playing soccer and baseball. I did that all through high school. And so I wasn't good enough to do those in college. But I like sports and I wanted to keep going with something. So I decided to try rowing.
So you tried rowing. You clearly got good fast, because 3 years after you started, you were already racing at the world championship level. It's when did you find speed on the erg? Because I look back at records, Ohio State was never that good. You guys were just never a great program. But when did you realize you were fast?
Well, I think my junior year, I would say, is when my erg really got into the realm of where those conversations started happening. So 97, so my third year. It's an interesting story, and I've told it a few times. And I talk to my guys all the time about it. Is just sort of the power of perception and what you think you're capable of and limits and all that. There was a lightweight guy on our team, and I was around a lot of good guys, committed, dedicated, big dudes. I was not the biggest guy on the team, and but there was a lightweight guy in our varsity, and we had this chalkboard that we would write our scores up on test day. We would have to come down and do it in between classes, and he was writing up his 2K, and he would write up 5:55, and I had no idea at the time. I just was like, I got 40 plus pounds in this dude. I should be able to beat him. And so I kind of set out to do that. He wrote at 56, actually 5:56, And, it took me a couple years, but eventually I got there. And, my junior year, I went 601.9 at the Cincinnati Satellite Regatta for Crash Bees, which got me a flight to Boston. And then I went to Boston, the Crash Bees that year, and they put me up in a hotel. It was like, that was surreal. And then I went 5:55 at that Crash Bees. And that was when sort of the conversations and invites started coming and all that.
Did that guy actually pull a 5:56 as a lightweight?
No, I was always curious what his real score would have been, because he was easily the fittest guy on the team. He was super strong in the weight when we lift weights, and highly intense person. And I think he would have been a good lightweight. I just think that, for whatever reason that he was doing that. But, I always
was like the head coach maybe just fucking with you and saying, hey, here's 5:56, go get it, boys. Is that a possibility?
I don't think so, because it kind of like came out later that he was making it up. And, the head coach probably just was like, he trusted us. And, he wasn't, I don't think he cared as much about ergs. And at a program like that, you're going to put your best rowers in anyway. And so, and this kid was super athletic. And he was a good rower. And so, for me, I credit him. Like, without that as a carrot, I don't think I would have been as good on the erg as I wouldn't have pushed myself. I mean, that allowed me to separate and get to that level.
What else? What were you doing to get that fast? I mean, were you just doing long and lows, or were you working on power application? Because to go from never touching an oar to 5:55 in 3 years seems really unlikely, right?
I think there's some genetics involved and some physiology that I was very fortunate, to have. And I think it was a little bit of right place, right time. The erg had changed in those years. It went from the B to the Model C. So maybe that was a bit different. Our coach was a big fan of Gladstone when he was at Brown in those years in the mid 90s. And so he basically told us, I don't know if this is true, but he basically is like, I have Brown's training program. That's what we're going to do. And so it was like a lot of 2x40s, 2x40 minute on the erg, 12x500s. Those are kind of the ones I really remember, like that kind of stuff, intervals, and then there's a long winter in Columbus. And so you're on the erg a lot. And we lifted a lot of weights. We had a weight room in the boathouse, and we lifted a lot of weights, and that was a lot of fun.
All right. So back then, it's not like today where social media is a thing, cell phones were a thing. How did the national team find you? Was it just because you went 5:55? They're like, get this guy in here in 97?
No, I had to mail in my score with like a coaching recommendation. So I don't know if you remember, but back then you would get, USRowing would publish the scores that were sent in, and it would come in a packet in the mail.
Yes.
And it would just be a printout, and I would get it, and I could see where people were and what the top scores were. And I think like that year was when the majority of people from 96 retired. And so there was a window of opportunity, and that the timing of that, where my erg started to come up when people at that highest level were retiring, I think. And then also Mike getting the job coaching, who was open to someone like me coming. And he invested a lot in the erg, and he valued that a lot. That also helped. And so I literally would get these printouts, and I would be like, okay, I'm not that far off. And I started submitting my scores. And, that year I submitted the 55, and it ended up top 8. Because like all these people had retired, right? So, and so like literally that fall, I got a gigantic box of Nike gear, because there was still a sponsorship with USRowing and Nike, and I had never made a team. And I'm just sitting on my couch in Columbus, and like FedEx delivers this. I mean, it was huge, like 2 pairs of shoes, rain gear, sandals, shirts, pants, like everything. It's crazy. And I was like, oh, this might be lucrative. I might be this is legit. I'm gonna.
All right. So 97, you get invited to the camp. You guys are training in Princeton, right? Like this is
Yeah.
the Armory is where you guys are training. Mike's new, and some of these guys start coming in. I mean, men that like are burned in my memory because I've seen your documentary 50 times, right? This great group of guys. Were you one of the youngest at the time? Like in
I
that?
think, yeah, I think so. I think there was like a few of us that were still in college or just out of, probably a handful of us.
Was it looks like from the outside looking in, it looks like a group of just egomaniacal, crazy strong men. Like it
Yeah,
looks like you guys
yeah,
could knock the shit out of somebody at any point in
yeah.
time.
It was
Was that the
scary, to
case?
be
It was
honest.
scary.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was scary.
yeah. I was nervous. Like I was young, I was new. I'd never been around that level before. It at times it was pretty terrifying. I mean, everybody's super nice, but like you're right. There was nothing easy about it, and there was an edge to it. They're very welcoming. It was like a lot of camaraderie, a lot of fellowship, and those kinds of things. But it was like if you screwed up, you heard about it, and there was like you could get knocked, you could get punched in the head. It was like somebody might whack you if like you mess up enough.
I
And
have a
to have
feeling.
that edge, I think was good.
Well, I think it's essential. And I think it's essential, but I don't think it's like that today anymore. I just don't
I
get
don't
that
think so.
sense.
No, you don't. There's not that vibe, which is, I mean, times have changed, but I do think there's that coming up in that. There was a lot. I had a lot of guys to look up to, and that was an advantage for me. And so I paid attention. I listened to what they said. I followed them. I did what they said. I didn't screw around for the most part. I mean, I did have fun, but when it came to the rowing, I was very serious.
Like I look at like Chip, and I think he's like the instigator, but could also knock you out on your ass if he needed to. So like he
Yeah,
had it from the coxswain all the way up.
yeah, they were serious people. They had real jobs, and this was like they were committed, and they were going to do this, and they were on a mission. And you were either going to get in line or get out of the way. And and I didn't look the part. And so to credit to all those guys, to just if this guy can make us faster, I don't care where he's from or what he looks like, we're gonna fold him into the group. And I felt that, and I thought that was great. And I have all those guys are lifelong friends.
I can't imagine that you're not. So 97 through 99 is an incredible run of just domination. And you said you were on a mission. Was it vocalized like, we're going to win the Olympics and we're going to do this every day?
It was pretty much vocalized every day. Like, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And you're either on board or you're not. And if you're not on board, no one has time for you.
Wow. And what was the largest group of guys you had at one time?
I think there were like 4/8 of dudes, maybe, which is big for a training center.
That's insane. Like that's insane. I don't think it's like that
people
at all.
Everywhere. No, they're pretty small now. I mean, when I was coaching with Luke, like we had 3/8, maybe 24, 28 guys. And that felt big. And there was constant pressure to sort of reduce the size. And I think that was part of Mike's genius, and what Mike was really good at was in motivating people and getting people together and getting a lot out of them, good or bad. Like it sharpened the edge of the sword.
I've heard that statement actually a couple of times, talking to guys from your era. There was like a sharpening of the sword. It was all the time, all the time. What were you doing to make ends meet? Because I don't think that you were getting paid to do this. Like how did the money work for you to be able to live and train all those years?
Yeah. So before 2000, I did odd jobs, and, I would, paint driveways or clean gutters or, remove asbestos or whoever it was, people around town, like whatever they needed, I would go do things. I had like a weird office job at one point, editing like sort of, I don't know, these medical briefs, okay. That was short lived. things like that, just odd jobs basically. And then after 2000, I got the Home Depot job, which was, you got paid for 40 hours, but you worked 20. So that was like a salary job, and that made a big difference. And there was prize money. So like, instead of getting a monthly stipend, if you performed, you would get a big chunk, a big check. And so you would live off that. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to sort of survive on.
So I mean, everyone knows I've watched the race in St. Catharines probably 100 times. You guys coming back, winning 99. The crowd looked like it was the largest rowing crowd in the history of rowing. Like, that just looked incredible. But then this the most famous documentary comes out in my mind, A Fine Balance. And man, I got so many questions about that. First off, what was it like to have that camera crew around you as much as it was? Because it looked like it was a very intimate setting. The camera was there a lot.
Yeah, I think it was a little surreal at times, and you kind of, but it was also fun because as a rower, you don't really get cameras around you very often, and it's not, it was unique. So it felt like, oh, this is legit. People are, making a movie about us. Like, this is serious. It did add a little bit of weight to the environment. I think people were like, it was either going to be, it exposed the tension of what we were trying to do and the drought we were trying to break. And it sort of highlighted that every day. I think Brad, being a rower and a gold medalist himself, and like, writing, the books that he's written, and we've all read them. So I think that allowed him some intimate access. I think he was very friendly, and, it was like, he was a rower, so it was like easy to sort of talk to. And I think that made a difference. So it was a little surreal at times, but, you kind of got used to it. And yeah, it was fun to talk to Brad about rowing.
So there's a couple scenes in this movie documentary that are drilled in my memory forever. One was you're spackling a goddamn apartment. And looking back, because like, I'm an older man now, you're an older man now. I noticed two things. One, how laid back you were, but also like arrogance and ego, right? Because like, when you were talking, you're like, oh, if we fucking win, I mean, I'm gonna jump out of the boat. And can you walk me through that moment? Can you think back to when you were personally interviewed, spackling your house?
Yeah. I mean, that was actually Jamie Coven's house.
Okay.
Funny anecdote. Yeah, it was, when I think back and I look at that, I see those scenes or hear people talk about it. Like, to me, I sound very young, and I sound a little immature, and, I sound like, I feel like it is a pretty clear picture of who I was, like a new rower who made his way to the top and is like, has a chance to go to the Olympics and win. And, I was confident that we were going to do it. And I got that confidence, from Mike and from the guys that I rode with every day. And, I had a lot of faith in those guys that if I just did what they told me to do, we were going to win. And so that's where that confidence and that ego comes from. And, we had won. So it was like, yeah, this is going to continue. And so those interviews are through that lens, basically. And so that's where all that comes from.
There's another moment where you're at the crash B and your Mike's behind you and he starts yelling 22 Volp, 22, 22. And I'm not kidding you when I say this. I'm still rowing, I'm still erging. And I think about that when I'm pulling, trying to do 500-meter, bursts or whatever. Was that moment with the cameras and knowing that you're going to be in the Olympics in just a few months, talk to me about that moment. 122 with 500 meters to go or 300 meters to go, having Mike screaming in your head. Is that all just a blur, or can you think back to that erg?
No, I remember it. Yeah. No, it's vivid. That was the first time I broke 550. Wow. And so that was my goal. And, that was back when Crash Bees had two Ks. There was a heat and a final. And so that was the heat. and because I knew there was no way I could do 2. And so I went for it on the heat. I remember in that one, I started sprinting at 7:50 to go, and I felt good, and I was like, I can do this. I'm going to break 5:50. And I remember Mike just being there the whole time. I don't really remember the camera. It was like, and I remember thinking that, Mike was there, and I remember his voice, and I remember thinking, like, if I do this, I'm going to punch my ticket to the Olympics. Like it's going to be hard for them to take me out of the boat if, I can break 5:50 and be one of the top ergs. It's just another sort of data point that's going to make it harder. And so that's what I remember thinking. And it was like, I don't remember it being hard or any pain or anything. I just remember, like the numbers coming down pretty easily and pretty early in that piece.
And so 5:48, 5:49, like what was the
5:49, just under
5:49. So like for the young guys out there, who watch this and listen to this, I mean, how much different was your training from the 5:55 to 5:49?
I went from like once a day to twice a day, basically. In college, we were doing once a day. I would do an extra erg here or there. I would do an extra weight session, nothing crazy, right? But we were doing 2 a days under Mike. It wasn't 3 days. It wasn't crazy volume, but it was hard all the time.
And at the time, that was all the time. Was that like one of the top scores in the 8 at that point?
I think like Garrett Miller was like close to 5:40. So he was a big one. And I think it was at that point one of the second or third fastest. There were guys that didn't make it that were faster.
Yeah.
And I think that was an era when there were a lot of good ergs too.
Well, the probably the most famous moment is when the young guy from Brown comes in and pulls a ridiculous score. I would love to know. I don't want to talk about was it the right or wrong decision. I want to know what it was like inside the boat when that was happening. Like, were there discussions internally? What were you thinking when that was going on at the time?
For me, there were discussions. There were a lot of discussions. And, for me, I was the youngest guy, and me and Tom Welsh, the 4 seat, were the same age. So, and we came up at the same time. So like for us and for me, it was just like, I kept my head down and just was like pulled hard. I was like, that's my job. And I'm not gonna, rock the boat or like really argue whether or not someone should be in or not, right? That's not my place. But some of the veterans and guys that have been around for a long time were having discussions with Mike, and I think the movie goes into a little bit about how that decision was made and why it was made. Mm-hmm. I think when I look back at it now, it's like, if like Worley, like we love Dave. Dave was a great dude. He was really funny, great to be around. It's a lot to ask of a 19-year-old kid and have that be their first team they make, is to put him in that pressure situation.
So was I guess it was, you're just like awestruck of his power and size, right? Like how are you not, right? How are you not? And as a coach now that you run one of the top elite programs in the country, UPenn, is that a decision that you would have made similarly, or would you have thought less about the erg?
I would have gone down that path. I would have
the same one Mike took.
Yeah, I would have like looked at it. Now, if I had options and if it wasn't going well and there were other options, I would have also looked at those. Like that's sort of the lesson to take from that. I think like one thing I go back to all the time is how important chemistry is in a lineup. Like Worley, when he was in that boat, when it was those guys that had won in 98, 99, that repeat lineup, there was something about that lineup that clicked, and it was like there was an ease to how we rode, and there was an ease to being around each other. And that, I think, is significantly undervalued, but it's also very hard to pinpoint and notice when you're a coach and have the guts to kind of go with it. which I think Mike did in '04. There was a lot of chemistry in that boat too. And, I that's my lesson from it, is like, yeah, the erg matters. You cannot win without power. I mean, you just can't, especially at that level. Because everyone pretty much rows the same or just as well. And there's some differences in efficiencies and style and things like that. But basically you need power to win. And so it's like but if there's no chemistry, like is the power getting utilized basically? And so that's the question you have to try to answer. And I think chemistry enhances that power. Like if everyone's getting along and there's a good easy rhythm and flow and swing to it, then the power gets enhanced. If that isn't there, then it becomes a struggle to utilize that power. And then doubt can kind of creep in. And I think that's kind of what happened, and what you see in that movie is that there's an element of doubt in ourselves and in the system and in what we were doing, because it just wasn't clicking the same way and it wasn't going as fast, as easily. It was more work.
Was Chip vocal about it a lot? Was he?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him. I think so. I don't know. I don't know how much of these guys had direct conversations with Mike and what they said, and with Mike, it's like, Worley was kind of stuck after he qualified the 4, and which is a bummer. And it's like, when you take that out, just that one move, it's not so much like the other guys weren't good enough, but it was like, it deflated the room a little bit.
There's an underlying thing, and maybe I'm reading between the lines here a little bit. So give me some leeway here, but it feels like Mike was the coach. No one questioned it. You moved on. And in today's world, I feel like if the coach makes a decision, parents, friends, family, rowers all get involved and try to adjust the decision making. And they don't leave the coach to be the coach. So like, you guys had such a respect for him and the decisions that you kept your mouth shut and you pulled hard. I think in today's world, I think it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there is definitely a shift that has happened. And there are good parts of that, and there are parts that are more difficult, right? There's elements that that can be beneficial, and there's elements that make it more challenging. And Mike wasn't perfect, and neither were we. And who knows, maybe if we said something or spoke up more, the result would be different. Maybe not. But it was like, I think back then there was more of a feeling of, as an athlete, you have one job and you have a lot of control in that job. And if you do a good job doing that, then you're going to have success more often than not. That's the way I looked at it. And also I knew that like, you're going to lose sometimes. Like you don't always win. And I think you have to learn from losing. And being at Ohio State, I lost all the time. So I was, some could say I should be super smart based on that, but but I gained a lot of experience through all that.
You get 5th, cross the line. You're in a foreign country. Was there much to be said after that race, or was it just some tears and some anger? Like what happened after that? You crossed that line.
Yeah, there was some anger, there was tears, like people were frustrated, and it's if you look at the movie, there's a scene at the end where it's like me, Garrett, and T. Welsh, all kind of like, we're the youngest ones. And there's like a slow-mo shot of us like coming in for a hug at the end. And I think in the end, we didn't really point a lot of fingers, I don't think. And I think in the end, you just accept the result and you try to grow from it and come back the next time and do better. I remember right after that, you're in where all the grandstands area, you're meeting with friends and family outside the security. And I went and I walked over and I sat on the grandstands and just up high, but then down below, when I got there, there was a bunch of guys from the British 8 who were celebrating with their family. And so I just sat and watched them and like soaked it in, and was like, let this sear in my brain because I don't want it to happen again. And then you kind of like take a step back and then get back to the drawing board.
really respect that. I didn't know that about you, that you sat there and watched. You guys do a lot of retooling. You guys, the makeup of the team shifts a lot over 4 years, from 2000 to 2004. I've watched that race, I don't know, maybe 1,000 times. And I know there's been a lot of interviews with you guys on that race. I don't want to dive too deep into it, but I mean, you had open water at the 1,000 and it looked so goddamn effortless. Was that because of chemistry, or is that because you guys changed your training plan and your stroke changed? Like, what happened in those 4 years that got you to that position?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot, I think, I think Mike changed a lot. I think he grew and changed the way we selected from pairs, basically, instead of just seat racing in eights and only eights and doing that. And there was still an emphasis on the erg, but we spent 3 months in San Diego and Chula Vista doing 3 days and rowing pairs, and it became more of a technical sort of a camp. And at sometimes it was difficult and the training was hard, but it was like the small boats made a big difference, I think. But I think a lot of it was chemistry, and I think a lot of it through those 3 months and through that process of like how hard that was. You were able to see kind of who's moving boats and like guys start to click. And then we literally got in that lineup and it was like one row and we all kind of knew that it was good. And
why did you move from bow to stroke? So why did you, so what was like, did you make it's like, I'm taking.
No, so if you go back from 2000 to 2004, each year I sit in a different seat in the 8.
Yeah.
So, and I had been stroking pairs with JR, and I stroking straight 4s every once in a while. But I think the stroking came from just being in the pair, and then having some success there in the stroke seat, and both in practice and then at the selection regattas. Like I don't think JR and I lost a selection regatta, or I don't think I lost a selection regatta over those 4 years. I think I lost one speed order in the pair. And Joey and Matt Deacon will never let me forget it. So I think that's where a lot of that confidence came from in the stroke seat. I remember the first time they put me in stroke seat in the 8, Pete had to like stop me and be like, he just goes, like, pulls the mic. He's like, dude, just relax, breathe. You're going to be fine. Just row. And I was like, because I was, you get up there and you're like, I'm going to change the world. And then you start doing all this stupid stuff. And then it sort of like came, I started to figure it out a little bit. And the rowing that I was doing in the pair started to transfer to the 8 and started to really click.
What advice do you have for a stroke seat getting in that position for the first time?
Do less than you think you need to. Like rely on the people behind you. They are almost, I would say they're more important than you.
I've heard this told by almost, I guess, half the people in your boat, that warm up at Athens, right? Where you're just like, I'm ready. I want to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah. It was hot. It was hot. And I think what happened is I think I warmed up on the erg more than I normally do because I was nervous. I was so nervous in Athens, like outrageously nervous, the most nervous I've ever been. And I did not calm down until Carl Lewis came and talked to us. And he was like wandering around. Somehow he got in and linked up with Matt Imes. He was behind there, like looking at the boats. And he literally, all he said was, he just looked around and goes, oh, gonna go race the final. So he's like, oh, ain't nothing to it but to do it. Like just so matter of fact. And like, here's like probably the greatest runner in the history of America.
Yep.
And like, it calmed me down immediately. But I think before that I had erged a lot, trying to get rid of some of the nerves. And so I was extra warm. And so I think that anecdote speaks to the chemistry and the trust that we have in each other. It speaks to the trust that the crew had in me, and we had in each other, because I literally was ready, and they didn't even hesitate when I said I'm ready. Pete was like, nervous. Pete, I could see it in Pete's face. He was like, "Oh, this is either going to work, or this is going to be the worst mistake of my career." And he just talked to me, pulled the mic aside, and was like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm warm." And then he basically asked the boat, and to a guy, they went down the boat and said, "Yeah." Wyatt, I think, was the one guy that was like, "Oh, fucking Volp," you know.
I think he's my favorite rower in that boat. I love the way that guy rows, man. Just there's something about his stroke. It's beautiful. So at what point in that race did you know you were winning?
About halfway. I knew that we could.
You knew that you could, like from
when you're up by that much, you're like, okay, if I don't make any mistakes, we can win. Because I knew no one's going to get through us.
Nobody talks about the fact that you broke the world record in the heats or the semifinals, right? Like you broke the world record. Really. Yeah, that doesn't matter.
No, it's like it's the preliminary race.
Who gives a shit, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
You cross that. Damn. All right. Well, you go at it again for 4 more years.
Yeah.
And now at this point, you're the old man, like the guys from '96, that are starting to retire. What kept you doing it another cycle?
I just loved it. It's like, it's what I wanted to do. It's who I was. And it was, I just enjoyed all of it. I think when I think about my career, it's like a sort of bell curve of like attitude. I came in super young and inexperienced and just was happy to be there and, loving it. Right. And then just excited. And then at the peak in Athens, it's like, I became a little bit of a prima donna, a little bit of a pain in the ass, a little bit hard to row with. Mike, I was a thorn in Mike's side constantly. And then on the back end, it's like you come full circle and you go back to sort of your roots and where you were, and you start to realize that you're coming to the end of your career. And it's like, you realize how fortunate you are and how lucky you are to be able to do that. And you just enjoy every moment of it.
Mental health has been a huge topic for rowers lately, right? Like a very good friend of mine, Emily Schmieg, I'm sure you know who she is. She was a lightweight rower. My wife rowed with her for a period of time, struggling, finding herself after, right, rowing. Like she retired. She never made it to the top. And then, you spent 12 plus years training, only rowing with odd jobs to make ends meet. Like, what happens in 2008, 2009, when you're like, oh, I better put my big boy pants on. I got to have a career. I have to adjust now. I mean, was it a natural transition to coaching, or was there a lot of struggles mentally about what you're doing?
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, and I felt it more, I would say, in 2005. So when I came back right after Athens, we were training full time. I doubled up that year in the 4 and the 8. Yeah, it was an intense year. And I'd say that's the most fit I've been, but I was burned out. And I literally was 28, or I think 29 maybe at that point. And I was sleeping on an air mattress on the floor of a church in Princeton underneath a pool table, and for the summer training. And I was like, I cannot live like this anymore. I got to think of something else I'm going to do when I'm done with rowing, because I can't do this. And so I didn't know what to do. And it was a struggle. And so I started doing research on cooking schools, and I loved cooking and food. I was like, okay, maybe I've always kind of was into that, and maybe I can make that happen. And so then I took a year off and went to culinary school in 2006 in Seattle. And I think doing that early made the transition after Beijing much easier for me, but because I kind of went through it and dealt with it while I was still rowing, in a sense. I always had a hunch I was going to come back, but I didn't know. And so basically, when I retired in 2008, I was driving from Princeton to Seattle to find a job in a kitchen. And I got a call on the way from Mike Callahan about the opportunity at Pocock to coach their high performance group. and I drove basically straight to the boathouse and interviewed, and decided that, like, the bug was still there and I want to be a part of rowing, and maybe there's a way for me to do both food and rowing.
Were you able to actually have a job in somewhere like cooking?
Not in Seattle at that time, but when I moved to Oklahoma City to coach at the training center there, I got a job there cooking in a steakhouse, and so that was an interesting life, because I'd be up at, you'd work all night, and you'd get off at like 2, and then I'd be up for practice the next morning, and it didn't last very long, but
So
it was still a lot of fun.
So between you and Sarah, like, you're the cook, you're the chef, you're the guy that.
Yeah, I'm the cook. For better or for worse. Yeah, I'm the cook.
So all right, well then, before I move on to coaching at UPenn, like, what do I do to make the perfect steak? Tell me, what do I got to do at home to make that perfect steak?
Rest your meat. Always rest your meat longer than you think you should. I think that's probably it. I think, like, high heat, sear it, and then let it sit.
How about salt to pepper ratio? Is there like a lot of salt and pepper on there?
If you're using a grill outside, then over season it, because a lot of that will fall off in the grill. If you're using a pan, just regular amount.
Look at that. Look at that.
Yeah.
Oklahoma Steakhouse. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's fun.
All right, so UPenn. So look, from the outside looking in, there's a lot of rumors, always rumors about Penn. So it goes back to Stan Bergman, and he taught me how to row. And then Greg Meyer, right? My head coach at GW, right? There just seems to be a lot of cycling out of coaches at UPenn, and it from outside in, we think that there's just a lot of pressure to win, right? But you get this job. Why take the UPenn job? Why, a history of people leaving in a couple of years? Is it are you a glutton for punishment, or like, what is it? Why UPenn?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I got a call about the job when I was living in San Diego, and they asked me to interview. And so I figured, well, initially I thought I should interview and go through the process and hone skills that way, right? And just see. And so that's what I decided to do. And I applied and I went through the process. And in my interview process here, I had never been to Penn before. I love Philly. I have a lot of friends in Philly. Like, I love Boathouse Row. I think it's an amazing place. And we love this area, and we knew we eventually wanted to move back. And when the opportunity came up and I interviewed, I had never been on campus. And when I walked across the street onto campus, I just liked the feel of it. I liked the school, I liked the city, I liked where it is. And then I really enjoyed the people that I met in the interview process. I didn't meet any of the athletes. And I met the coaches here, and I met, some alumni that were on the hiring committee, and I met the administrators. And I hit it off with a lot of those people. So there was some negotiations. There's a lot of back and forth after that, but I also appreciated the challenge in a sense. I knew it was going to be hard, and it is. It's not easy, but I think anywhere in this league is not easy. I think that's the misconception that people have. They think that, if it's easy at places like Princeton and Yale and UW and Cal, like all these other schools, like it's just they have it easier. And I think the reality is they don't. It's hard everywhere to win, and it's hard to be good at whatever it is you want to be good at your craft. And no matter where you are or where you're coming from or how far back you are from being at the top, it's the same amount of work. And you just have to do it and commit to it and sort of stay focused on what you're doing and get it done. And then, law of averages, kind of over time, you'll if you do that and you sort of do that with integrity and honor, you're going to have more success than not. And you're going to learn a lot along the way. And so that's been a lot of my approach here, is just getting the team to have fun rowing and training and enjoying the process and enjoying what they're doing and trying to be as excellent as they can be in a boat and be their best version of themselves. And I think if we can do that, then we're going to have success, and obviously we want to win, and I want to get this program back to where it has been in the past. I have no illusions that that's going to happen fast. I have no illusions that it's going to be easy. And I think the alumni I talk to don't either. So, I feel confident that I'm not going to be sort of the next in a long list of Penn coaches to sort of have a go at it, and but we'll see.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, and I don't even know if you kind of just answered it. It's like, could Penn be a grand finalist in the IRA in the men's Open 8? Like, is that a possibility, like a true possibility to get there?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What does it take to be a grand finalist of the IRA?
You got to have power. You got to have talent. You got to have all those things. You need good athletes. You need good people around, and you need them to do the work that's required, right? You need to row as well as everybody else is rowing, and you need to pull harder. It's pretty simple. And now the question is, are we as coaches doing everything we can to support the athletes in that sort of endeavor, in that mission, and making sure that we're sort of guiding them in the right direction so that they can get there, and reminding them when they go astray of why they're here. It's definitely possible. It's a matter of what is it, Shawshank? Time and pressure.
Time and pressure. Well, speaking of pressure, I am convinced that 96 to 2006 was the greatest era in rowing, US rowing history. And you were a major part of that. No one can convince me otherwise. And I think I have more often than not, they believe that. We talked about in the very beginning, the pressure of being at Princeton in that 97 to 2000 era. Now, this is a different time these days, but do you as a coach, do you naturally transition to that and say, we want to build that kind of environment at wherever you're coaching?
I think I try to do elements of it. I think it's like a more compassionate version of that. I don't think you can, I think that was a moment in time, and I don't think that can happen anymore the way the world is. I think there can be elements of it, like where you're hard on people and you get the most out of them, but they have to be almost more on board than we would have been back then. You have to sort of, it has to be their choice.
What kind of what is going on with international recruiting? Like, how has that changed the makeup of the IRA programs and clubs, colleges in the country?
I think it's raised the level a little bit. Like I think anytime if you're recruiting all over the world and you're getting the best people in your sport all over the world, it's going to elevate the game. And I think that's a good thing. And I think long term, I think American athletes, if they're around people that are good and that are better than them, they will get better. And then, if you move the standard, people are going to meet it, right? It's like when the lightweight was making up his scores, I didn't think to myself I couldn't do that. I thought to myself, the hell with this guy, I'm going to beat him. And you need people with that attitude. I need people at Penn that see this as an opportunity to sort of prove themselves, and they don't shy away from the challenge. And so you get enough of those people, then you get some momentum, and you can make some progress. And I think international athletes do that. They have that, and so I think of them less in terms of where they're from, and more in terms of where's the quality coming from, where are the top athletes, and how do we get them here? Now, there are issues with parity, I think, in terms of like how many internationals I am allowed to have and can get in and can support versus other schools. I think that's an issue. And I think that makes things more difficult at certain places. So that, I think that's something that we have to deal with as a sport, just to make it sort of as equitable as it can be and as fair as it can be. But I'm not going to like, you can't look at what other people have and say, well, that's just not fair, and throw your hands up and not try. Right. So it's like, yeah, it's a challenge. I'll get the best people I can get and I'll make them go as fast as I can, and, or as fast as they can, and see where we land. And hopefully from there, you start to get some momentum, and you get a couple of those top recruits from international places.
So, you've changed quite a bit since the young guy in Jamie Coven's house, fucking spackling, the wall. Do you use the gold medal, I believe it was a bronze, in the in the 08. Do you use those medals and that history as a tool to get other athletes to come row for Penn? Like, hey, look, I'm one of the only coaches in the country that has this history. Come row with me.
I would say no. I mean, they know. I try to make sure they know, so they know who they're coming to row for, and they know my pedigree and like what I've done. But the truth is, I'm getting old enough now, and to the point where they have to Google me. So it's not like they know. So it's like, it's helpful, but there are a lot of good coaches that have a lot of accolades and have won a lot of races, so I'm up against that. So you got to be careful of like living in the past.
You said it earlier, and I wanted to bring this up. It's like the dads of the kids know you better than the kids.
Yeah.
Is that a tough pill to swallow? Is that hard to swallow?
No, I think it's fun. Like it's good. It's a good actually way to like, the kids relate now. They see it as like a way. I think they see it as a way to relate. And if they think I'm old, whatever. It keeps me young. I have to like learn what music they're listening to, what movies. And when I learn about their culture and kind of like what they're into, it is shocking sometimes. And like when I learn about like what they like and enjoy from like my era, that's even more shocking, because I'm like, you guys really, that's what you took from the 90s? Come on now. That's better stuff.
There's a moment in the movie, and you guys were erging and you were listening to WMMR rock. And I remember that thing. You were listening to the radio,
Yeah.
And whatever came on, and you guys are in the middle of a fucking 10K or a 6K, 2x6K, and like, commercials come on. And like,
yeah,
the kids back then do not appreciate that is what we had. Erging. You don't have Katy Perry playlists, like you got.
That's actually very hilarious, because I literally 2 days ago, one of my juniors texted me and he said, Coach, what did you like? Do you have any like mixed tapes? Like, how did you listen to music when you erged? And I said, yeah, we had mixed tapes early, and then it was CDs. We would make playlists and play them on the CD, and you had to pick it before you started.
Yes.
And they were like, oh, they're like, do you have any of those? And I go, I can try to dig them up. And so I brought in, like, I found all my CDs from the air, and I just brought in, like, you have the CD case.
Yeah.
I just brought them in and gave it to the guys, and I said, all right, have fun. And they're like, well, how did you listen to music? Well, I was like, well, there's a stereo, and then I found a picture of a Discman.
Wow,
I sent it to them. I said, just imagine stuffing this up your trough and trying to erg. Like, not comfortable. The cords and the foam headphones. It was.
Yes, dude. I love that. Now, last question, and it's more towards like the future. So much has changed with the coaching and the future of USRowing, and that happened when you started, right? So you went through a regime change when you started your era. I like to think you're optimistic for the US in the future. Are you?
Yeah.
Any advice to the guys transitioning?
Just remember that they're the ones that matter. I think, like, that's the important part. What are the essentials in rowing? You need athletes, boats, oars, and water. If you have those things, you can go fast. And they have all those things. I think they have a very talented group. I'm very excited for how young they are and what they can do. I think they just have to stick with it. I think people overreact a lot to the results of the Olympics, and then they give up, in support. Like, I think that, we have talented athletes. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of good Americans. And we just have to encourage them to keep going and find a place that they can row and help support them. I am very optimistic, because I think the other thing I'll say to them is, like, it's everything that everyone's talking about now about what US Rowing needs to do and how we're going to change it to fix it and all this. They've been talking about that for decades, right? And you can win in spite of all that if you're committed enough and if you just focus on it and commit to each other as athletes and trust whoever your coach is, just trust it and build something. You don't need some system to tell you that it's going to work out or how it's going to work out. Just make the boat go fast, and it tends to work out.
I bring it up because I would imagine that after the 2000 Olympics, there was a lot of chatter to the rowing population, but also some decision makers like, right? Like, we put all this effort, we put all this money, we put all this time, and and there you guys were, heads down, rowing, and then changing the direction of US Rowing forever in 2004. So you'd be a perfect person to talk to these younger guys now.
Yeah, it's not as dramatic as everyone makes it out to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bryan, I smiled the entire time. I've had such a good time talking to you and learning about this story. And everyone tuning in on our podcast and on YouTube, there will be links everywhere to get a hold of UPenn. And if you're interested in rowing for UPenn and one of the most decorated rowers in US history, here's your chance. Bryan, thanks for being here. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It was great.
Tune in for more. We got these things coming out every single week.